mi amor. Mi amor. Mi amor. Te estimo. Mi amor. Mi amor. Si no te veo. Mi amor. Me muero.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for being with me this next hour. You are listening to Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks on Transcendental Tuesdays here on 12radio.com and simulcasting on my YouTube channel, which has the same name as the show, Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks. And that's something to stick in your mind because within, I don't know, a month, maybe 6 weeks, we are going to discontinue using or at least broadcasting on 12radio.com. Now, we're still going to have archives over there. We're going to have links to shows. We're going to use that website, but we are not going to be broadcasting. So you will need to come over to YouTube, which is very, very easy. And then you can, watch it live, or you can come back later for who knows how long and just listen in and listen to whatever you want. So thank you for joining me over there. Those of you who are already there. Hey, Leslie, it's good to see you, and James and people coming into the room. Thank you so much. And I think I'm getting a little bit better about paying attention to that chat room. So if you do have a question or something going on about what we're talking about today, please feel free to post it over there, and I will try to take a break and check that out. So this is June 23rd, 2026. And on today's show, of course, we're going to look at the week ahead, which includes the planet Mars moving into Gemini. Now, that's going to happen on Sunday, June 28th. And truthfully, I don't know what it is in my world, but I feel like that has already happened. There are so many communication type things that have just started speeding up. And I feel this energy behind them. Now, of course, it could be a combination of lots of planets, maybe all that fire sitting in the cosmos right now. But I was just thinking yesterday, surely Mars has already moved into Gemini. And I go, no, double check. It has not, but it will be there by Sunday. But maybe we're just getting a preview because it feels like things are really speeding up when it comes to communication. And the other thing we're going to talk about today by special request from the chat room, Mercury in Cancer. Mercury is the communication planet, currently in Cancer and moving through the astrological houses. That was the specific question, is how does it influence each of the houses, and maybe what can we expect? Now, I hope I'm on target with what that request was, but that's what we're going to talk about. So if the houses are of interest to you, there's, I think, lots that's interesting about today's show. And of course, those of you who are already like maybe further along in astrology and you love the interpretation, you might listen to some of this house information. It'll be repetitive, but then again, that's exactly how we learn. I mean, I continually go back and read references or read my own materials and go, oh yeah, I kind of forgot that, because it was like just one little remark or one little thing. And I go, yeah, that's true. That is the 8th house doing that, or that is the purview of the 7th house, that kind of thing. So I hope you'll find that interesting. We're going to do it during the second half of the show. But as a reminder, Mercury entered Cancer on June 1st. So it was just a few weeks ago. And this planet, ordinarily, I mean, it moves pretty quickly. It's very close to the sun in its orbit. And it can take as little as 14 days to go through a sign. But what's going on now, which is one of the reasons I really do want to take our time and talk about those houses, is that Mercury is going to retrograde. And it's going to do that on the 29th of June. It'll be there through July 23rd, is how long the retrograde is. But that means Mercury is in Cancer from June 1st until August 9th. That's a long time for Mercury to be in one sign, and especially in Cancer, which is very intuitive, it's very receptive, it's very subjective. And I just have a feeling that this summer or those couple of months are going to be very interesting in terms of our kind of mining our psyches or our hearts or whatever you want to call it, our subconscious, for memories or for things going on for us. And, I think that can be a real mixed bag because sometimes, yeah, we just store up all those memories and all they really do is keep convincing us, of something that we don't want to remember. However, this can be a really useful period. So I thought, let's just really talk about what might that feel like to have Mercury in Cancer and moving retrograde, but just be there for such a long time. So we're going to get into that. We're going to go deep. But of course, we don't talk about everything going on this week. Please check out Mark's Power Peak, the digital online newsletter. If you're not a subscriber, it comes out every week, every Saturday night. You can subscribe finding the links on 12listen.com or on 12house.com. And please do that because not only will you get to read my article, which is the week ahead, which tells you the astrology and all the stuff going on, my take on what the week is going to look like. But there's also a number of other topics like tarot and I Ching and numerology and spirituality. You don't want to miss those articles either because you know what? I think the synchronicity of it is we're in the right place at the right time. And we're going to just stumble across something, so to speak, something maybe that we don't ordinarily read. And there it is. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I needed to hear. That is especially true with Mercury in Cancer. Those water signs are so intuitive. We just seem to be guided automatically to the things that we need to hear or we need to talk about or that we need to understand. So check that out. And I'd also highly encourage you to check out the other shows on YouTube and 12radio.com, specifically Mark Husson. He does Astrology for Life every Monday morning at 8 a.m. That's Pacific time. He also has Mark Husson Astrology, which is members only. It's a very low fee to subscribe, and he does a lot of shows throughout the week and on special topics. So if you're into astrology or just in general into kind of broadening your horizons, I would highly recommend those. All right, so we're going to jump into Mars and Gemini. And what I'd say, when I say jump, I mean it. Get ready for some mental gymnastics and quickly changing scenarios as Mars vaults into the very versatile, intellectual, and I'm going to say magical sign of Gemini, because I feel like especially this summer, it is going to feel very magical. Mars is the planet of inspiration, motivation, and action. Here again, I always say it's what gets us up in the morning because it's what motivates us. It's that urging, look at your Mars, look at its placement in your chart, look at the other planets that it's around, and you'll get a clue as to what really motivates you, what gets you going, what gets those juices going. So Gemini is the sign of the twins. It's all about information gathering and communication. So here again, no matter where our Mars was when we were born, that's always very important to understand. But right now, for the entire world, for everybody, we will be under the influence of Mars in Gemini as it transits through that sign. So there's going to be kind of a rub-off effect, or there's going to be an influence there. Now, the two people that kind of always jump to my mind when I think about Mars in Gemini, the first is Meryl Streep. Because here again, think about it. Mars is influencing our communications and in some ways the roles that we play, those twins. And when I think of Meryl Streep, I mean, I don't even know exactly what it is, but I think she has been in at least 60 films, movies. And that doesn't even get close to the number of roles that she has played on stage or on TV. I mean, she is just the consummate actor, right? She can just step into those various roles and just take them on and do them. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying that Mars in Gemini, the twin sign, I think it helps give her the ability, the motivation to want to do that, to take on those personalities. The other person I think about is Martin Luther King Jr. And the reason is because think here again, Mars, powerful speech. If Mars is sitting in Gemini, the ability to inspire people. And he was a prolific writer and has incredible speeches that we go back, at least I do, go back to time and time again. It's like they're part of our culture. And there's, is there anybody who really doesn't even know who he is or who can't quote something that he said? At least, I have a dream. I mean, it's just, like I said, it's just really interwoven into the fabric of our lives. To me, at least partially, that is Mars in Gemini. So when Mars is in this twin sign, it really means that we're pouring our energy into mental activity, chasing ideas and interests wherever they take us. And as a gatherer of information, Gemini likes to sample. And I like to emphasize that because the opposite sign, Sagittarius, is the sign that really likes to categorize everything. So, you know what Gemini does? It's almost like a bee gathering pollen from all these different flowers, going here and here and here and here, gathering it all up. So, there again, the more experiences, the better. We're eager for exposure to new information and new people. And it's almost as if we can't get enough contact and communication. But are we going to go deep? Or are we just going to gather a bunch of stuff and then see what we've really got? Almost like, I'll tell you the visual, I almost get it like a kid on Halloween, just running from place to place or running from, house to house, and then coming home and dumping all the candy out and sorting it out and deciding what they like and what they don't. So just remember that I'm not saying Gemini isn't deep, but they like to sample the information. They want to collect it and then kind of take a look at it and see what's happening. So, sometimes we can feel a little scattered or frantic when planets are in Gemini. So, with Mars, though, take advantage of this kind of motivation to maybe learn something new, to participate in a class, or to listen to a podcast, or read a book, or do something that's communication oriented, because we've got the motivation automatically there. Because what's happening? Mars works magic with thinking, learning, networking, communications. Expect that the pace of our lives is going to pick up. Social activities are going to be in full swing. We want to meet a lot of people or have a lot of fun or do some things. And here again, remember, Mars will be in Gemini until the morning of August 11th. So we got a little time here, about 6 weeks. And that's when it'll enter Cancer. But meanwhile, what's going to be going on? We're thinking, we're writing, we're editing, publishing, reading, we're taking and teaching those classes or workshops. Maybe we're absorbing YouTube shorts or live feeds on YouTube and any number of other social media platforms. We're expressing our opinions and beliefs. We're going to art fairs and farmers markets. We're talking to lots of people. We're having some of those, what you might call incidental contacts with people. Maybe we're perusing those few brick and mortar bookstores that are still standing. And we're looking up old friends, maybe family even, participating in political discussions and protests. Because what's happening? Mars is fire. Remember that. Gemini's air, but Mars is an activator. And so it is on fire. And so are our minds, and it is also, I think, very youthful, very playful, very inquisitive. And I often think of Gemini as being very amusing, very funny. So with Mars and Gemini, we value intelligence. This is another thing, and I'm going to kind of hit this. It's getting to be towards the shadow side, but I want to mention it. We value intelligence and impressive thinkers and formidable speakers. So yeah, there's a lot of people out there who are the strong silent types, and maybe they're mysterious and they have something to say, but we're directing our attention to those who stimulate and provoke us with their voices and their ideas. Now, unfortunately, this includes a lot of those people that you might just say are shysters. It includes that kind of unscrupulous, fraudulent, or deceptive kind of information, whether we're talking about politics or sales jobs, or I don't know about you, but I get I want to say 5 or 6 emails at least and multiple texts every single day that are just totally scams. Oh, we didn't receive your payment. And of course, I don't even have an account with those people. Or your email is going to be disconnected if you don't immediately click on this link. And that just seems to be happening all the time anyway. I mean, I feel like when I open my email and my text, I'm just like in caution mode. Don't click, don't touch that until you really know what it is. And just be thoughtful and thinking, well, you know what? That might be even more obvious or just happening a whole lot more with Mars and Gemini because it's stimulating communication, right? So, and I think to some extent, I also want to say that the ability of Gemini to take in all those experiences is tolerance. If we're always in a defensive mode, then we're going to miss some things because we're not hearing them. But because we let our guard down a little bit, we go, okay, I'll take in a whole range of information. Before we know it, if we're not thinking, we can kind of get caught in a trap. I sometimes think about conversations that I've been in where somebody will assert something and I'll say, well, how do you know that's true? And they'll say, oh, well, because I heard it. And it's like, well, where did you hear it? Who said it? Well, I don't know. It was just one of those things. And I said, well, was it really from blah, blah, blah? And they really can't say. And the situation, it'll go very circular until finally the person goes, I have no idea where I found out that information. I just think it's true. And so, you know what? It's fun to dip into all this information, to sample all this information. But I think we also have to be a little careful. So I'd say enjoy the magic show because that's the visual that kind of comes to me with Mars and Gemini this summer. Now, maybe not every time Mars is in Gemini, but what I'm getting is it feels like a magic show, which is thrilling and interesting. But it's sleight of hand. We want to look in that direction where the person is pointing and not someplace else. So just be aware of that. This is something to enjoy, but don't fall for every trick in the bag. Okay? Now, we're also going to be pulling in Mercury in Cancer because that's going on at the same time. And that alters some of this information. And why? Because Mercury is the communication, planet, rules Gemini. So do you see how these two are going to work in tandem together? And it'll be interesting what the two of them together are coming up with. But I'm going to just keep with Mars and Gemini just for a couple more minutes. And once again, give you like a few quotes, not many. But here again, from Meryl Streep, and her Mars is conjunct Mercury, the planet of communication. They're both in Gemini and they're sitting together, which means, they're really combining forces in her chart. And they're trine in a positive connection to Neptune in Libra. Neptune is the planet that is, it rules Pisces, but that's the one associated with movies, and illusions. So isn't that perfect that her Mars and Mercury are working in tandem with Neptune in her chart? And they're also loosely trine Jupiter in Aquarius. So see, she's got that wonderful kind of, air energy working that grand trine. It's very loose, but it's a grand trine in her chart, which may account for the foundation of her incredible ability as an actor. So one thing she says, though, and listen to these words, it's amazing what you can get if you quietly, clearly, and authoritatively demand it. And I love that because it's like Mars is that authoritatively demanding it. But she gets, she's pulling in those other energies, the Libra energy from Neptune, and the Aquarian energy from Jupiter. If you quietly, clearly, and authoritatively demand it. Then another person is Neil Donald Walsh. Some of you, probably a lot of you, might be familiar with him. He wrote those books that were called Conversations with God, which is interesting too, that even in the title of his books, it's about talking, it's about conversation. His Mars is conjunct Uranus in Gemini, but also is in a good connection with Pluto in his chart. And one of the things he says, and I think this is good for us to remember this summer, there is no truth except the truth that exists within you. Everything else is what someone is telling you. So just kind of keep that in mind. Another person who has Mars in Gemini is F. Scott Fitzgerald, very, very famous writer. Now, his Mars in Gemini is tightly conjunct Neptune, once again. Dreams, illusions, fantasies, also trine Venus. And, many of his stories, I just think, were trying to kind of figure out what love was and what relationships were, that kind of thing. And it was also in relationship to his Mercury in Libra. So there again, Libra, ruled by Venus, relationships, love. And he said, and I love this, to be kind is more important than to be right. Many times what people need is not a brilliant mind that speaks, but a special heart that listens. And that really appealed to me because we know that Mercury right now is in Cancer. It's about the heart. It's about what we really need. So I love this. Not the brilliant mind of Gemini, but a special heart that listens. So I love that. It kind of jumped out at me about the combination there. Not that he has that combination, but it's what's going on right now. Okay, and one more person is Richard Bach. And Richard Bach is the one who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull. So some of you, I feel like I'm really dating myself. That book was just like a standard, metaphysical textbook years and years ago, several decades ago. And he also wrote Illusions, and he wrote a number of other books. But I'll tell you what, his stuff was, close to, I'd say, being revolutionary, but it brought some of those metaphysical, some of those ideas to the public that had never heard them before. And one of the things he said, he has, by the way, his Mars is in Gemini and it's conjunct his Sun in Venus. But his Mars is at the very, very end of Gemini and his Sun in Venus are at the very, very beginning of Cancer. So they're conjunct even though they're what we call out of sign. And they're also, his Mars is also square Saturn in Pisces. So I think that's true too. If you read his books or you're familiar with him, he was kind of a rebel without a cause in some ways. And that's where I see that square with Saturn, the authority. But even, with his dreaming, even with his illusions, just challenging the status quo. So there again, people talk their charts. So one of the quotes of his is, learning is finding out what you already know. Doing is demonstrating that you know it. Teaching is reminding others that they know just as well as you. You are all learners, doers, and teachers. And I thought, what a wonder. He has so many wonderful quotes in his books, but I love that because it embodies all those things that have to do with the mind, learning, doing, teaching, but also the idea that I don't know anything that you don't know. Maybe I remember it, but I don't know anything that you don't really know. So we're always in that process of remembering what we already know somewhere within us. All right, so let's move on to Mercury, retro in Cancer through the houses. Now, Mercury is not retrograde yet. It's not going to be there till the 29th of June. But once again, I think this is timely because of Mars moving into Gemini. Now, another thing I'm going to throw out, and I'm not going to tie it together very well, but when something hits me, I think, okay, I need to bring this up. And I think it does tie in. There's a word called anamnesis. And it's not just a word, it's a process. It's, I guess that's what I call it. It's a process. And what it means is recalling to mind, triggering memories, smells, tastes, sights that trigger memories and experiences. And so it's not a word that you're going to hear in conversation very often, but it just like literally popped into my mind when I was preparing my notes for this show. And I thought, it really is in many ways perfect because with Mercury in Cancer, June 1st through August 9th, what we have is learning, teaching, thinking, all those Mercury functions, but they're all moving through water. They're all moving through intuition, impressionism, that idea of things just gently kind of coming to our consciousness. So it's not that clear, here's a word, do this, do that. It's not that clear communication. It's coming through feelings. It's coming through hunches and intuition. And so I'm just throwing that out there, anamnesis. And just this idea, that process, recalling to mind. And I think that is exactly what we're going to figure out, or that's going to be our process, is that Mercury and Cancer very gently focus our minds inward. And we do tend to turn to the heart and feelings for guidance instead of our heads, instead of logic. But on the other hand, those feelings can really lead us astray too, right? Because that's it, they're feelings. They're not necessarily logical. In fact, they're not logical, but they can be instinct or hunches. But just knowing that we're kind of under the influence is what I call it. We're under the influence of these feelings. And I think what's going to happen as it goes retrograde and it turns inward, because that's what retrograde really means, turning inwards. As that happens, I think we're going to have a lot more of those little things just coming up. And, these little things just coming to mind, these psychic hunches, things that just are very subjective, but just coming into our minds that we're going, I remember that. And then maybe having the opportunity to not necessarily say this is true or this isn't true, but just what influence is it having on me? And, here again, we're not going to talk about this week. We may in the future, but it reminds me too of that whole idea of just having a bag of regrets or having a bag of, resentments, all those little grievances that we carry around. And I mention that because sometimes that's exactly what happens. I'm upset or I don't like something you've done, and I reach into my bag and I go, yeah, I remember my mom did that, or that happened to me, and this happened to me. And so this is another thing. We may realize that we're carrying around a whole bag of grievances, and we may want to double think that. Why? So what? So what if you fell down and skinned your knees when you were 3 years old? Does that mean you can't walk down the street now? I mean, that's where bringing in kind of the Mars and Gemini, or bringing in a little more logic, might really help. Because Mercury retrograde in Cancer, I think, means we're going to revisit everything having to do with family, home, tribe, belonging or not belonging to a group, relationships in general, the process of relating. We're going to revisit the past. And there again, remembering something doesn't mean that we have to let it influence our lives right now. So when I talk about Mercury retrograde in Cancer as about relationships, I really do think this is an incredible time to look at relationships in our lives. Maybe look at some of the ones that we've let go. Maybe we haven't maintained them. Maybe we haven't taken care of them. Or maybe we're doing a really good job. But just remembering that, sometimes, like for instance, I heard the example of, in fact, Barbara Moore, the writer who does a lot of tarot, said something like this, that, relationships, they're not like having a meal or making a sculpture or finishing something. Relationships are never done. They're an ongoing process. And if we don't maintain them, if we don't take care of them, if we don't allow them to grow or to go their own way, then of course they're going to fall into disrepair. So thinking about our relationships is we're never quite done. And during this retrograde, we may, I think a lot of relationship stuff is going to come up. And there again, we get to, with Mars sitting in Gemini, we need to take care of what we're saying, our words, our communications. Maybe we need to communicate less, maybe connecting more. I don't know what the magic proportion is, but I do think that you can expect relationships, especially anything having to do with the past, or there again, home, the idea of family, the idea of nurturing yourself, taking care of, being a caregiver. I think all those things are going to come up. So expect that. Now, we're going to spend the next 29 minutes, maybe 25, looking at those houses. And hopefully I can get all 12 of these houses done without too much ado. And for those of you who there again, you know some astrology, you're pretty far along. You might be listening to some of this house information and say, oh, yeah, I've got all these planets in houses 1 through 3. Well, that does tell you something about your natal chart. But here again, even though Mars isn't in Gemini yet, just try to go with that flow. And here again, you can come back and listen to this anytime that you want to because it's on YouTube, right? Well, know that yes, it says something about you when you were born with planets in a particular location of your chart. It says a lot. So you can look at that, but you can also just look at where planets are sitting now in your chart. What houses are they activating? And specifically, of course, we're thinking about Mercury in Cancer. That's what we're talking about today. But you can use this information, on your own, however you want. So here's some information about the houses. And a couple of points first. You can choose to interpret the houses similar to human development. That's what helps me. Like if I think of that very first house, that's birth. That's the baby. That first house even often can describe what our actual birth was, or some of the early kind of things that happened to us. So when we look at that first house, that's a baby being born. And as we progress all the way through and we finally get to the 12th house, then we're talking about the elder. We're talking about accumulated wisdom and experiences that we gathered through a whole lifetime. So here again, you can kind of look at these houses and think the first 6 are very personal experiences, growth and development, because there again, that's what happened to the baby, right? They would go through these cycles of development. Then houses 7 through 12 are collective and shared experiences with others. You see how that makes sense? 1 through 6 is we're developing, we're the little kid, we're getting a little bit older, we're becoming a teenager. And then 7 through 12 is how we're interacting out in the world. Another way to look at it, we can think of them as being quadrants. So divided, the houses 1, 2, and 3 are very personal and about self-development. Once you get to houses 4 through 6, we're talking about self-expression, starting to interact, starting to put it out there. Houses 7 through 9 are self-expansion through interaction with others. And houses 10 through 12 are transcendence of the self, collective interaction and contribution. So there again, if you had your personal chart read or you do it yourself, you may look at that and say, when I see a person that has all these planets in 10, 11, and 12, I always use the word transpersonal because sometimes trying to talk to them, they're not usually thinking about their ego so much personally as much as they're seeing themselves as part of the world. And what is their influence in the world? How do they interact on that level? And I can tell sometimes, it's hard. I'm not going to say it's hard to talk to their ego, but they're thinking in a whole different way. And same thing if I'm looking at somebody with, houses 1 through 3. Now, another way, Howard, now I don't know if I'm saying his name right, Howard Sasportas is somebody I like. I've got several books by him. And he says, he divides the houses this way. He says houses 1 through 4 are personal, me in here. Houses 5 through 8 are social. Me in here meets you out there. Then he says houses 9 through 12 are universal, us in here. So I just offered that as several different ways to, there again, just start to approach the idea of those houses as each one representing an area of our lives and self development. And of course, if you're born with planets in houses, they tend to activate or turn on the energy of that house. And that's true of the transiting planets as well. But I also want to say this because, of course, it's a question that always comes up. What if that house is empty? What if there's nothing going on there? That does not mean nothing is going on there. It simply means it may not be activated or turned on by a particular planet. But never think that you've got empty houses or nothing going on, because there's a lot going on. And once again, if you've had your chart read, you know that there are so many ways to start sifting and digging through that house and figure out who's the ruler, what is the energy in that house, and what is that ruler doing. There are so, in fact, I say there are so many things that you could read a whole chart, or at least begin to, by looking at nothing but the sign on the house cusp. All right? All right, so let's dive into house one. House one, the baby is born, right? This is also known as a rising sign. Self appearance, body image, first impressions, the mask, the physical body, how we present ourselves to other people, how we put, what we want people to see about us. Now, as I mentioned before, it could actually describe the process of your physical birth. So you might think, like when I talk about memories coming up or the past coming up, you might find if you actually have Cancer there and Mercury's retrograding in that first house, you might actually find that some of the memories that are coming up for you are ancient memories. They're ones that are real. You find out something about your birth, or something comes to mind and you think, man, I haven't thought about that forever. But once again, what is happening in the first house? It describes the physical appearance and the qualities that we want to project. It's how we want people to see us, the face we believe we need to use to get along in the world. So anytime you've got those planets, like it's very sensitive when a planet goes over the first house cusp. Why? Because we're changing how we want people to see us. Sometimes that's simple, like it's changing our hairstyle or our clothes or, what we're studying or something. But this is very important because and remember too, the sun is your ego, but the rising sign is how you want people to see you. So oftentimes when somebody goes, boy, I sure didn't know you, or I didn't know you until I got to, really got to know you, it's because the sun isn't necessarily right there. The sun is how we see ourselves. The rising sign is that other part of our personality that says, this is how I want you to see me. People fall in love with other people's rising signs. So once again, as Cancer goes through there, or rather Mercury in Cancer goes through there, and especially moving retrograde, you may find that a lot of stuff is coming up for you about how you're seen by other people, the face that you want to wear. Okay, moving into house two. This is the Taurus house ruled by Venus. By the way, the first house is an Aries house, naturally ruled by Mars. But house two is Taurus ruled by Venus. Now, so think about that baby. House two is my stuff. And I swear, when one of the first words babies usually say is mine, it's mine, mine, mine. You know how a baby just wants to latch on to everything. And sharing is not exactly part of their experience yet. So this is our resources, our possessions, our finances, what we value. Now, this also, I think, really covers our skills, aptitudes, talents, and abilities. Things we're good at. Because once again, it's self-worth. What makes us feel safe and secure? It's a relationship with an attachment to our body, to comfort, physical environment. And of course, it's about money. It's about resources. It's about the things we collect and accumulate. So, once again, if you've got that Mercury retrograde going through there, maybe you're really looking at your collections and saying, this doesn't have any meaning to me anymore. Or maybe it's something, you know what, I really do want to hang on to this plate. Grandma gave me this plate, or it could be really rethinking how you want to earn money, how you want to bring resources into your life, or how you want to treat the resources in your life. But once again, remember the ultimate is it's about your values. What do you think is the most important? And truly, like in that second house, even though we call it money, you look at somebody who has Taurus on the second house or one of the earth signs, then you're going to see somebody who really does value more material things. But other people, like Libra, they're valuing relationships, and you're talking about a whole different animal, so to speak. So what you're going to be really doing a deep dive on your stuff, on your values, maybe on your money, or how you think that reflects on your self-worth. House 3. This is a house that's ordinarily in the natural chart, what we call it Gemini, and it's ruled by Mercury. And so this is naturally where Mercury sits. It's all about communication. So once again, what is the baby doing? The baby has gone through that phase of here's all my toys, here's all my stuff. And then they kind of look up and they go, hey, who are all these other people? Siblings, community, neighbors. It's like the first inkling that we get that maybe it's not all about us and the world isn't simply revolving around us. So we've got to find a way to connect. Who are these people? Who are these other kids that want to play with my toys? So this is about the acquisition of language, and it's about mobility. This is a baby crawling, learning to walk, understanding or starting to meet neighbors and community. It's about early childhood education. It's about transportation and vehicles and short journeys. And so it's about what I find also when I see clients or people with something moving through their third house, I swear they almost always say, I'm writing a book, I'm writing a poem, I'm writing a screenplay, I'm writing something. They want to express themselves in some communication form. But once again, you've got something retrograde like Mercury moving through there. Are those memories going to come up of early childhood? Or maybe things about, education. Maybe you say, hey, I want to have a reunion of everybody I went to grade school with. Or it could be something about your car or your vehicle or your community in general. There again, it could be a lot of things. I'm just throwing out some ideas. So house 4, this is naturally Cancer. It's ruled by the moon. This is what we consider home. It's where we think we belong. This is where we attach to family roots or maybe don't attach. Ethnic identity, early childhood scripts that we believe, how we think we did receive nurturing or did not receive nurturing. This, of course, is a house of parents, mother or father. Now, traditionally, historically, Cancer was always, this fourth house was always considered mother. However, there's a lot of people that believe between the 4th and the 10th being father, because it's Capricorn, that it really is the other way around. They see more the influence of father at home and mother out in the world. And one of the reasons that is true is because father, at least culturally, and that's, changing, but father really had a lot of the rules at home, regardless maybe of what mother said. But also mother taught us how to be out in the world and how to meet and greet and how to be successful in the world. Typically mother spent a lot of time with us. Now here again, I'm totally talking more archetypes than really physical people. But just know this is a house loaded with energy that has to do with parents, has to do with our family, has to do with the tribe that we think we belong to. It has to do with psychological family inheritances. Think about it that way. Something that we just believe or something that we just feel like is there because that's what my family has always done. This is about our inner life and where we want to be private. But it's also just on a very surface level, just about our home and what we want our home to be, how we want it to feel. So we may become very self identified, or a lot of this Mercury retrograde is happening at home. What we want that to look like, how we want it to be different or the same or more nurturing. House 5. This is naturally a Leo house ruled by the sun. This is one word I love with the fifth house is pleasure or fun or enjoyment. Because even though this has to do with a lot of different ideas, as many of the houses do, they all weave together with that idea of pleasure. Because this is about self expression. It's where we want to shine. Remember, it's Leo. Where do I want to shine? Where do I want to be creative? Where do I want my creations to be? It's a desire to be special and recognized, which means it's sometimes related to fame when you look at people's charts. It certainly has to do with children. Now, that can be your inner child. It can also be your children. So, this Mercury retrograde maybe has a lot to do with your relationship with your children. It's about having fun and playing and recreation and hobbies, sports and games and romance and love affairs. So, there again, think about that. Are you having enough fun in your life? Are you having enough play? Are you connecting to your inner child? I'll also throw out that I often see when people, now I'm not telling you to go out and buy a lotto ticket, but oftentimes if I see something big going on in the fifth house, especially, if there's anything going on in the eighth and or the second, that's when people are really enjoying things like, winning the lotto, or they hit the slot machine or whatever. That's, where I see that, because they're out there having fun, maybe with very little attachment to the results, and they tend to win in those situations. All right. So now we're moving on to house 6, which is the Virgo house, ruled by Mercury. This is a house of work and service and health. And even maybe more than that, it's about habits and everyday routines. It's about knowledge, skills, and abilities. Often, if I see a lot of activity here, it could be a health situation going on, but usually it's a routine, or often it's somebody who says, I want to go back to school. I want to take a class. I want to learn something. It's like we somehow get in touch with the sixth house, almost like a secondary work house, because I want to up my game. I want to do something different. And this is how I'm going to improve it. That Virgo energy of I want to become an expert at something. So it's about the food that we like to eat, the kinds of jobs that we like to do, relationships with coworkers, and it's about relationships that we have with people who provide services to us, like the hairdresser or the dog groomer or a plumber or a car mechanic. It's relationship with small animals and pets. So there's a whole bunch of ideas I'm throwing out there, but just recognize that, maybe you really start looking at your routines differently, or how you want to up your game, or maybe this is about health. Maybe you want to really change something about health. Or there again, looking at some of those inheritance as a family, maybe you're looking at something in your health and going, you know what? I don't want to be this way just because that was my parents. Just because my family has this gene or my family does this, maybe I don't want that. Maybe that's not part of my life. Maybe that's not part of my script. So even looking at some of those things. All right, house 7. That's the Libra house, ruled by Venus. It's the process of relating. But this is the house of commitment and committed partnerships. So like the fifth house, that's people we'll play with. Sometimes those are those dates and blind dates and maybe even one night stands. But we commit to the people in the 7th house. And this can be both intimate and professional. So it can be people that we are business partners with, people that we really have committed to doing something with that is not necessarily intimate, like a sexual relationship, but it's intimate in the sense that we've made a commitment. We're in this with somebody. So it also describes the characteristics of people that we attract and that we're attracted to. Never lose sight of, though, the 7th house is you. We tend to project onto other people, oh, I love it when somebody's wild and crazy or whatever they are, because that's what we want to do. So don't ever lose sight of that. So it's very possible that Mercury retrograde in Cancer is going to reveal something to you about yourself and what you want, what you see as missing in yourself, what you see as you want to do more of in your life. So that's the seventh house. The eighth house is naturally the Scorpio house, ruled by Pluto and or Mars. Mars was the traditional ruler. And this is the first thought that came into my mind is, ooh, Mars and Gemini, are we giving away our secrets? Because the eighth house is, I think, very funny because it is a very hidden house. It's a very private house, but you get any kind of communication energy like Gemini. Now, we're not talking Gemini here. Although if you have Cancer in the eighth, you might also have some Gemini. Those people all of a sudden are sharing secrets and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're talking about that. That seems like very private stuff. But the eighth house is what we share with other people's money. It's money that comes into our life, maybe through wills or trusts, or maybe it's money from a spouse. It's our spouse's money, but it's a deeper version of the second house and values. And so it's all levels of shared experiences. It can include intimacy and sexuality. It can be relationships, remember that Scorpio, that are really, really catalysts for change in our lives. It's about mysteries and secrets and psychology and taboos. It's about the subconscious. It's about the way we deal with death and rebirth issues and meet transitions in our lives. I think also it's about vacations. And I say that because I think the eighth house shows us how do we want to vacate our lives? Literally, vacate our lives and our routines and doing something different. So there again, you really want to turn your life upside down. You want to really introduce something really, really new into your life. Look at your eighth house. Now, if you've got Cancer sitting there, you may want to go to the ocean. You may want to be near water. You may want to go soak in one of those, anti-gravity tanks of water, whatever. You want to vacate in some way, but you want to really deeply get into your subconscious. So maybe you're going to take an astrology class, or maybe you're going to go get therapy. There's any number of things that you're going to do because you're going to dive under the surface into those feelings. But also, maybe it's a vacation that just really becomes a catalyst for change in your life. Ninth house is Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter. This is about our belief systems, our religions, our spirituality, our philosophy. It's where and how we look for truth. So this is a house that is associated with long distance travel, especially just travel in general, higher learning and education. It's also about the law and the justice system. It's about publishing. It's about becoming a teacher and a student and a mentor. It's about the experience and attitudes that we have towards anything we consider foreign. It's something different than ourselves, and we want to know what it's about. We want to kind of fill in that missing piece by looking at something different. It can also be about relationships with our in-laws. So if you're married or you have in-laws, you got a sister-in-law, a brother-in-law, it can very much be about that. So once again, lots of ideas here. But don't be surprised if you're picking up something spiritual, or you say, I want to travel. I want to learn something new. I want to get on YouTube and do my own radio show, that kind of thing. All right, house 10. This is Capricorn house. It's ruled by Saturn. This is what we call the career house. But remember, this is all about reputation. This is an even more public persona than the first house, because this is more, what do I want to be known for? What do I want to be recognized for? What is my very, very public life, and what do I want to contribute? It's about those authority issues. Remember, this can be mom and dad, whatever. But here again, in a very, very real way, often this is about our career. This is about how we want to be seen as a professional person, or what our reputation is. So whether we're working or not, it's what our reputation is. All right, the 11th house, Aquarius, ruled by Uranus. This is about friends and associates, the people we choose to be with for social reasons, for political reasons, because we share goals and ideologies with them. So once again, on a very real level, this is about how are we looking at the future? How are we looking at these people? Who are the people we want to spend our time with? Because we want to go into the future with them. But, I would suspect that this is going to be very much about your friends. All right, I know that we're getting too tight here. So I'm going to go really fast. House 12. This is Pisces, ruled by Neptune. Very last house. This is the one that is so incredibly transpersonal. And here's a quote: "It's easy to believe we are each waves and forget we are also the ocean." Now, that kind of says it all. This is a house about hidden strengths, weaknesses, and limitations. It's often what we consider karma. Talk about Cancer moving through this house. This really could be very much about healing old wounds and issues. It could be going deep, deep, deep with mysticism, with healing, with transformation. It could be about the strengths and gifts that we want to use as a member of the world, as a world citizen. What do we have? What did we come into to contribute? This is ultimately the clutter clearing house as well. So just looking what's really under there. Like I said, this is mysticism, this is healing, it's hidden strengths and weaknesses. Okay? All right, well, hopefully I did all of those houses some justice and gave you some ideas. So coming up next week, we're going to be talking about some pretty exciting stuff, because literally I want you to pay attention. June 29th, full moon in Capricorn, Mercury retrogrades in Cancer, and Jupiter enters Leo. That's big. That's a year transit. That's all coming up on next week's show. So everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. To all the listeners and everybody in the chat room, thanks for the suggestion of going through the houses. I really appreciate that, and welcome your comments and suggestions. Thanks to Serena, who is our producer today. And I hope that you will keep it tuned to 12radio.com and also to YouTube, because coming up next is Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm gonna skip the quote because it's kind of long, and you heard some quotes, and you also heard hopefully some good things that you want to pay attention to and remember. So enjoy. We will touch base with the retrograde next week, but not too much time since we spent this week on it. This is CA signing out. You can find me for personal sessions on 12listen.com. Please feel free to request a scheduled call at a time that's good for you. You have been listening to Everyday Astrology with CA Brooks on YouTube, where we are changing the way we listen to the world.